Imagine this, a 6-year-old girl walking down the aisle to marry a 29-year-old man. And this is not some tragic story from the dark corners of history. This is an official royal wedding in the heart of Europe. The bride would become one of the most influential women of her time, only to have her name nearly erased from history books. Today, I will tell you about the queen who went from a helpless little girl to the woman who overthrew her own husband and seized power in one of the strongest countries in the world. Her name was Isabella of France, and her story began in the year 1292 at the Château de Fontainebleau. Her father was King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, not only for his appearance but for his ability to turn the French monarchy into the wealthiest in Europe. During his reign, the royal treasury was enriched by the downfall of the Knights Templar and the confiscation of their immense riches. Her mother, Joan of Navarre, was a queen who brought with her an entire kingdom and the strategically vital trade routes through the Pyrenees. Isabella's childhood unfolded within a palace where the fate of entire nations was decided daily. She witnessed her father receiving envoys from distant lands, drafting international treaties, and orchestrating medieval diplomacy. By the age of 5, Isabella spoke 3 languages: French, Latin, and Provençal. She was educated in history, geography, arithmetic, and even the basics of military affairs. But medieval Europe lived by its own cruel laws. Royal children were never just children. From the moment they were born, they were political tools. In the year 1303, peace negotiations began between France and England after yet another war in Gascony. The English king had lost several key fortresses and needed a pause to rebuild his army. The French, exhausted by endless conflicts, also sought to secure their conquests with a treaty. When Isabella was only 6 years old, her fate was sealed. France and England signed a peace treaty, cemented by the marriage of the little princess to King Edward II of England. The marriage contract was signed on the 25th of January, 1308, in Boulogne-sur-Mer. According to the agreement, Isabella received the county of Ponthieu and the city of Montreuil as her dowry, while the English crown returned several disputed castles in Gascony to France. Edward was the complete opposite of what people expected from a king in the 14th century. Instead of knightly tournaments, he preferred theatrical performances. Instead of hunting, music and poetry. Instead of wars, construction and craftsmanship. His father, Edward Longshanks, had conquered Wales and nearly subdued Scotland, leaving his son with the reputation of a great warrior. But the new king disappointed all expectations. Edward II squandered the royal treasury on lavish entertainment, invited actors and musicians from Italy, and built luxurious banquet halls. While he hosted celebrations, the Scots, led by Robert the Bruce, reclaimed their lands one after another. English barons lost castles and estates in Scotland, but the king seemed indifferent to their losses. The worst part was that the king openly favored his male companions. The first was Piers Gaveston, a handsome, witty, but incredibly arrogant knight from Gascony. Edward made him Earl of Cornwall, one of the richest titles in the kingdom. Gaveston also received the Isle of Man, with its lucrative salt mines and the right to collect duties in several English ports. Gaveston didn't just enjoy royal favor, he openly mocked the English nobility. At tournaments, he appeared in purple garments traditionally reserved for members of the royal family. He gave scornful nicknames to the most powerful barons. The Earl of Lincoln he called the Big-Eared One, the Earl of Warwick, the Black Dog, and the Earl of Lancaster, the Actor. In a country where honor was valued above life itself, such behavior was equivalent to declaring war. Now imagine little Isabella's position in this world of adult intrigues. A 6-year-old queen, meant to be the symbol of unity between 2 powerful kingdoms, but practically ignored by her husband. Their wedding at Westminster Abbey on the 25th of January, 1308, became one of the grandest ceremonies of the century. Kings, princes, and high-ranking church officials from across Europe attended the celebration. The cost of the event exceeded £20,000, enough to maintain an army of 10,000 men for an entire year. But behind the splendor of the ceremony lay a grim reality. The little queen received her own court, a retinue of French ladies-in-waiting, tutors and chaplains. She was assigned apartments in the royal residences, but there was no real family life for her. Edward performed the formalities and then returned to his amusements with Gaveston. The years passed. The little girl grew up, but the situation remained unchanged. Isabella studied English law, took part in religious ceremonies, and received foreign envoys. She quickly mastered the English language and even the Welsh dialect, which impressed the local subjects. But she never received the personal attention of her husband. In the end, Gaveston was killed by rebellious barons in 1312. The conspiracy was led by Thomas of Lancaster, the king's cousin and one of the richest men in England. The barons lured the royal favorite into a trap near Scarborough, captured him, and tried him as a traitor. The verdict was predetermined: death by beheading. The execution took place on Blacklow Hill on the 19th of June. Gaveston maintained his dignity to the very end, refusing to beg for mercy. His final words were, "The king will avenge me." Edward indeed wept like a child who had lost his favorite toy and swore to punish his friend's murderers. For the next several years, the king fought against Lancaster and his supporters. The country was effectively divided in two. The northern counties were controlled by Lancaster, while the southern regions remained loyal to the king. Trade came to a halt, taxes were no longer collected, and meanwhile, the Scots captured nearly all English fortresses north of the border. But nature abhors a vacuum. Soon, Gaveston's place was taken by another handsome favorite, Hugh Despenser, the younger. Despenser turned out to be even worse than his predecessor. If Gaveston at least possessed natural wit and charm, Hugh was nothing more than a greedy and ruthless predator. He came from an old Norman family, but his father had squandered their fortune, and Hugh dreamed of restoring his wealth at any cost. Despenser systematically plundered the English treasury, coaxing the king into granting him vast estates and titles. He seized the lands of other nobles, using forged documents and royal decrees. In Wales, he appropriated several rich castles belonging to the local aristocracy. When the rightful owners tried to complain to the king, Despenser accused them of treason and confiscated all their property. The worst part was that the new favorite dragged the king into his schemes. Edward signed decrees without even reading their contents. He handed out royal lands left and right, not realizing he was undermining the very foundation of his own power. By 1320, the royal treasury was practically empty, and discontent in the country had reached a critical level. And what about Isabella? By the age of 20, she had become a beautiful, intelligent, and very lonely woman. Contemporaries described her as the most beautiful woman in the kingdom, with golden hair, gray eyes, and a graceful. In 1312, Isabella gave birth to her firstborn, the future king, Edward III. Later, she had a daughter, Joan, a son, John of Eltham, and her youngest son, Edmund of Woodstock. She fulfilled her dynastic duty, but never found personal happiness. Edward still preferred the company of his favorites, while the courtiers treated her like a beautiful ornament. But Isabella was the daughter of French kings, and the blood of rulers ran in her veins. She built her own network of informants and allies at the English court. Among her supporters were barons dissatisfied with the Despensers, merchants suffering under heavy taxes, and even bishops outraged by the plundering of church lands. Her moment came in 1325, when a conflict erupted between England and France over disputed territories in Gascony. French troops invaded English possessions and besieged several key fortresses. Edward understood that waging war against France amid internal unrest was suicidal, so he decided to resolve the dispute through diplomacy. The king sent his wife to France to negotiate with her brother, King Charles IV. This was the first serious mistake of the English king. Despenser strongly opposed the trip, realizing that the Queen might find allies in France to oppose him, but Edward believed that Isabella's close family ties to the French king would help secure favorable peace terms. At last, Isabella found herself back home, among people who understood and valued her. Her brother Charles welcomed her with honors befitting a queen. The French court was impressed by her intelligence, education, and political acumen. Here she was not merely a queen consort, but a true princess of royal blood. In France, Isabella met Roger Mortimer, an English baron who had escaped from the Tower of London after a failed uprising against the Despensers. Mortimer was a marcher lord, one of the wealthiest and most influential magnates in Wales. His family had defended the English borders from Welsh raids for generations, amassing vast wealth and military experience. 1321, Mortimer led a rebellion against the Despensers, but was defeated at the Battle of Boroughbridge. He was captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London as a traitor, but in August 1323 he managed to carry out a daring escape. He drugged the guards with a sleeping potion, sneaked into the royal kitchens, and escaped through an underground tunnel to the Thames, where a boat with loyal supporters awaited him. Mortimer was everything Edward was not: decisive, brave, a passionate warrior, and a skilled politician. A love affair ignited between him and Isabella, one that would change the course of English history. For the first time in years, the Queen felt like a desired woman, not just a dynastic symbol. Isabella was no longer a lonely, submissive wife. Now she had an ally, a lover, and a partner in one. Together they began preparing an invasion of England. The French court eagerly supported their plans. Charles IV had grown tired of watching the Despensers ruin the allied country and destroy the trade ties between the two kingdoms. Isabella received a loan of £2,700 from her brother to finance the expedition. Mortimer recruited his sons, nephews, and other exiled English barons to the conspiracy. In Hainaut, they found an ally in Count William, who provided them with ships and mercenaries in exchange for the promise that his son would marry Isabella's daughter. The preparations for the invasion took more than a year. They needed to assemble an army, secure funds to support it, and establish contacts with potential allies in England. Isabella demonstrated remarkable organizational skills, coordinating the actions of conspirators across several countries. In 1326, a small army led by Isabella and Mortimer landed at the mouth of the River Orwell in Suffolk. The army consisted of only about 1,500 men, a mixed force of English exiles, French mercenaries, and knights from Hainaut. By medieval standards, it was a tiny army, insufficient even to besiege a single large castle. But surprisingly, almost no one stood up to defend Edward and the Despensers. English barons, merchants, commoners, and even many priests were ready to support the Queen against the king. Towns opened their gates to Isabella, local militias joined her army, and royal garrisons surrendered without a fight. The reason was simple. After 18 years of Edward's rule, he had exhausted all goodwill from his subjects. Defeats in Scotland, the emptying of the royal treasury, and the abuses of his favorites had turned the once popular king into an object of universal hatred. People saw Isabella not as an invader, but as a liberator from the tyranny of the Despensers. Hugh Despenser the Elder was hanged in Bristol on the 27th of October. Before the execution, he was paraded through the streets in tattered clothes to the jeers of the crowd. Hugh Despenser the Younger was captured in Wales and brought to Hereford, where he was executed with exceptional cruelty on the 24th of November. He was hanged, but not to death. then disemboweled alive. His genitals were cut off and burned before his eyes, and only then was he quartered. Such an execution was reserved for traitors, but its brutality shocked even those accustomed to the violence of the 14th century. Edward fled to Wales with a few loyal servants, but he was quickly captured near Neath Abbey. The king, who once ruled one of the most powerful states in Europe, had become a pitiful fugitive. He was imprisoned in Kenilworth Castle and later transferred to a more secure prison, Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. Isabella became regent for her 14-year-old son, Edward III. Parliament officially deposed the old king, accusing him of incompetence and the embezzlement of royal revenues. It seemed justice had triumphed, and England had finally gained strong leadership. But absolute power corrupts absolutely, and Isabella proved no exception. First, under mysterious circumstances, her former husband died in captivity, officially from illness, but rumors spoke of a red-hot iron rod. Then Isabella and Mortimer began behaving like the new dispensers, looting the treasury, distributing lands to their supporters, and ignoring Parliament. Their actions in Scotland were particularly outrageous. Instead of continuing the war, they signed a humiliating peace treaty, effectively recognizing the independence of their northern neighbor. For this, the English barons began calling Isabella the French she-wolf. But Isabella's greatest mistake was underestimating her own son. Edward III was growing up, becoming a man, and closely observing how his mother and her lover ruled his kingdom. In 1330, when he turned 18, he decided to act. On the night of the 17th of October, a group of conspirators infiltrated Nottingham Castle through a secret tunnel. They captured Mortimer right in the chambers of the Queen Mother. Isabella cried out, "Sweet son, spare the noble Mortimer." But it was too late. Mortimer was hanged at Tyburn like a common criminal. Isabella was spared. After all, she was the king's mother and a daughter of the French kings. But her political career was over forever. The once Iron Lady spent the rest of her life under honorable house arrest at Rising Castle in Norfolk. She received a generous allowance, could receive guests, and even took part in some ceremonies. But she never held real power again. Isabella died in 1358 at the age of 63. She was buried in London, in Greyfriars Church, next to the heart of Roger Mortimer, which she had kept for the rest of her life. The story of Isabella of France is a story of how a victim can become a tyrant, how love can destroy kingdoms, and how power can corrupt even the noblest souls. She was both a heroine and a villain, a victim of circumstance, and the architect of her own destiny. What do you think of this incredible story of a medieval queen? Was Isabella a victim of her time, or simply a ruthless ruler? Share your opinion in the comments. If you found this story interesting, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Many more incredible tales of forgotten rulers and their unbelievable fates lie ahead. And don't forget to leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the heroes of past centuries.